Hey friends, this is Andy here. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Slightly Off Script Marriage Podcast. Bethany and I wish you a happy new year and a happy new season of the Slightly Off Script Podcast. Let's be honest, we have been dealing with some of the hardest and heaviest things that we have in years, and all of them in a very short period of time. So it's a little later than we'd hoped to get this first episode out, and we're going to share more about what God's been walking us through and how he's been forming us and keeping our marriage strong through it in upcoming episodes. But today what we have is a special episode recorded live the first weekend of January at Camp Spofford in Spofford, New Hampshire. We got to spend a whole day with couples from New York and New Jersey and New England. We got to talk about marriage values and have incredible conversations at the dinner table. And then to capstone the day, we recorded another live episode of the Slightly Off Script Marriage Podcast. This group asked us some challenging questions, and I think what we were able to come up with will be really helpful to you. So I'm excited to jump into this episode. So without any further ado, here's this week's podcast.
Welcome to Slightly Off Script, the marriage show where we remind you that marriage can be stupid good and wicked fun. I am one of your hosts, Bethany Needham, here with my favorite guy, the most handsome man in the room, sorry other men, Andy Needham.
Bethany, we are live at Camp Spofford in Spofford, New Hampshire. Wow. We definitely didn't coach them to be very loud at that point. We are at their winter family weekend. It is a freezing cold weekend outside, but it is warm in here in this beautiful room, and we have met some remarkable married couples. Have you had a good day?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, I feel like I didn't even need the energy drink for that welcome. That was fun.
That's incredible. And so what we have done, as we've done once before, this is our second time, so now we've done more than one of these. We have asked this group of people that we've spent the day with to give us some questions. And we're going to spend most of our time in our podcast today answering, or at least doing our best to respond to their questions. Yeah. So are you up for it?
I am probably up for it.
All right. Well, before we do that though, we need to give one little life update because we talked about milestones this morning, and you and I just marked a milestone, 23 years of marriage.
Yes.
This November.
Yes.
And we got away together, and not everything went on script.
That is the theme. Really. But yeah, we actually mentioned it to our guests today that one of the things that we have loved doing together, we did our first one on our 10th wedding anniversary, is for our 23rd anniversary, we went on a cruise.
That's right.
And it was amazing, but it started out a little different than normal because we went out of, for the first time, the Miami port. And we have never done this before, but didn't really expect anything crazy. But we had also done a first because it was our 23rd and we were treating ourselves. You got to treat yourself. And so we had, instead of getting a regular Uber, you had like a driver come pick us up at the hotel. I felt very fancy and super nice guy. He even came early. So we loaded up. We were so excited.
Well, everything's awesome.
Yeah, it's like 10:30 in the morning. We got plenty of time. In fact, we're going to probably arrive early, and that's fine. We're ready to go. Unbeknownst to us, Miami decided to shut down the tunnel, which is one of the main ways to get to the cruise ship port. And they did this on a day that we found this all out afterwards. They had the maximum number of cruise ships in port. And so basically we went from we are cruising, we're going to be there early, to dead stop traffic. And I mean dead stop as in around 1 in the afternoon.
3 hours for this. Should have been about a 35-minute drive.
Yeah. We're still sitting and not moving. And it got bad. I really had to use the bathroom and realized, you know what? This car is not moving. So I just got out and wandered the street until I found a restaurant that let me use their restroom.
You came back and found us pretty easily.
You were in the same spot. So I just hopped back in the car. But we reached the point where we're probably going to have to make a decision on this because actually now the boat's supposed to leave at 3 and it's 1:45. And
was it? It was 12:45.
12:45?
Yeah.
I don't even know the time. And so you're like, what do you want to do? And I was like, at this point, if we get out and walk, it's fine. We'll definitely make it because we're 2 miles from the port. I said, but if we wait, we're going to stress ourselves out. So we decided to do that. I forgot when suggesting that that right when we had decided to go on this trip, one of the things we had said was this was the final voyage for your suitcase because the wheels were gone. And so
It was like a little stub where the wheel should be.
it turned out to be 2 miles of dragging a suitcase that its wheels were no longer working over that bridge.
It was like 90. It was also like, I think the hottest day of the entire trip. I think it was like 94 degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were sweating by the time we got to the cruise ship.
Yes. So you should feel sorry for us dragging our suitcase to go on a cruise ship for
terrible.
Thoughts
Lots
and
of
prayers.
That's great. Awesome. Well, the rest of the trip was amazing, though.
It was a really good celebration. One of the things that we choose to do when we go on vacation, this is not everyone can do this, but every cruise ship has like an emergency number. So we know if there's an actual emergency, they could call and contact us, but we take our cell phones and we lock them in the safe. And so we don't need them for photos. We literally go unplugged for an entire week. And I read 5 books. I don't remember how many you got through.
I think it was less than it. I think it was like 3 or 4.
Yeah, but we basically just read and sit in the sunshine and eat food. It
was great.
And that's how we relax because we're old people.
And then we came back to a whole lot of life. So it's been kind of crazy since then. But let's jump into our questions today. We had some incredible questions. We're not going to have time to get to them all, but we'll address some of them in future episodes. So the first question here, this is a common question, and this is around marriage dynamics when you have children. The question is this: how do you prioritize your spouse when you feel consumed by your children? All the energy, all the gravitational pull is towards your kids. How do you still make sure that you're prioritizing your spouse?
That's a good question, first of all. The first thing that comes to mind, because even though now we're not necessarily in that season, we're empty nesters, which is weird. But one of the things I remember very clearly having to be an intentional decision that we faced was not falling prey to the societal pressure for our kids to be in every activity and do every sport and be in every after-school program. And the other one was that our kids, and they would actually tell you this now, had a very strict bedtime all throughout to the point of embarrassment on their part. I think it was middle school when our son had an actual conversation with a friend and realized, wait, what time do you go to bed? And why am I going to bed at this time? When our kids were small, we lived in the Metro West Boston area. Beautiful area, but high pressure on kids in like extracurricular activities. I remember our neighbor kid being in multiple travel sports. They were doing all kinds of like school things. Everything was about, in a weird way, building your kid's resume towards college or whatever it is. Pro athlete. I think everyone thought their kid was going to be a pro athlete. And so one of the things we just decided early on, we decided for our kids that neither of them was going to be a pro athlete. We love them, but yeah, it wasn't going to happen. Each kid kind of had one thing that they could choose, and we stuck to that one thing at a time for the most part. Like, we're not doing multiple things. And then again, the bedtime was for us, like, you guys go to bed at this time because we actually need to still have energy for mom and dad to be together after you go to bed. Didn't mean they had to go to sleep, because there was a certain age where they didn't necessarily need to go to sleep at 7 p.m., but they did go to their room, and that was like the start of quiet time. And honestly, I feel like that was helpful for more than just prioritizing our marriage. It actually helped for kids who are in a world of constant screens and everything else. It was like downtime for them. I think it helped them sleep better when they were ready to go to bed. So
another thing that we did at different times, depending on like what programs your church offers for kids or for teenagers, but once our kids entered into like student ministry era, we would actually plan Sunday nights. We would drop our kids off at student ministry, and then we would go to the same restaurant and we get an appetizer. So it was like a cheap date. We would sit down, and every single Sunday night we would have intentional connection point. There were parts of it that were sort of the managing the family part of life, but then there were also parts of it where we were just connected with each other.
I do think too, I don't know if this still exists, but I remember the guilt that I sometimes felt as a parent that I had to volunteer in everything that my kids were involved in. And one of the things that I had to come to terms with was that I had to disappoint people outside of my marriage and my family in order to prioritize my marriage and my family. And sometimes that was actually disappointing people in my own church, because when my kids were in Kidsmen, I didn't volunteer in kids ministry because when they were in kids ministry, that was a window of time that he and I could be together. But the flip side is when our kids graduated out, it actually opened the door for me to volunteer in things, because now that wasn't necessarily the same. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was being willing to disappoint other people's expectations to guard your time with your marriage. And whether that's outside or, I mean, disappointing your kids sometimes. Like sometimes our kids need those same boundaries of like, I love you, but mom and dad need time together. So you're going to be, whether that's you're going to go to your room early this evening for bedtime, or we're going out tonight and you're getting a babysitter, even if you're not thrilled about it. So
Yeah, I mean, our kids push back on some of the things that they mentioned, but that oftentimes that's them testing the boundary of something. Like, are you for real on this? Are you serious about this thing? And I think being careful not to let that, even disappointing your kids, be a barometer for you. Like, don't ignore everything that they say to you. I'm not saying that's not the plan, but don't let them sort of set the course of things on that. So yeah, I mean, this is one of those challenges that will not be, you're going to be solving for all of the time that you're raising kids. You will not solve it. As soon as you get it done, a kid's going to enter into middle school and then everything's just going to, the whole apple cart's going to get thrown off. You're going to be a whole new algorithm. So that's, there's my encouragement today.
And we have not done it perfectly. I've had to since confess to my kids and confess publicly that at one point when they started pushing the wake up time or bedtime, this was not very honest of me, but I started adjusting their digital clock by 5 minutes a night until they thought they were getting their way.
Why is the sun in the middle of the sky at 7 a.m.?
So it became they're like, yay, I get to wake up at 6 now, but actually it was 7. So it's fine. They've forgiven me.
Desperation. I understand. You have grace. All right. This one is not a light question. This is a heavy question. Okay. And we do talk a lot on the podcast about mental health challenges that we have walked through with our kids. And we always try to remind people that we can only come to these questions as parents who've walked through our journey. So we give our kind of perspective on this, but we're not mental health professionals. But this is the question. We have an elementary age child who, when in challenging situations or when up against boundaries, will speak about hurting or killing themselves. We've tried medicine and not seen any results. They're now off meds, and we are trying to trust God in this process. What counsel would you have for us?
Whew. First of all, it's always hard when it's like a group because you want to hug the person that you're
I see you and
speaking to. I see you for sure. God sees you. So I do want to reiterate, I'm not a mental health professional, so I can only speak to my own experience with our son and our daughter. Both have had varying challenges, and our son in particular went through a period of time where suicidal ideation is kind of where it started. SI, if you're not familiar, is sort of that more the thought to harm themselves. And for him, it was that verbal intention to harm himself.
Similar to the question.
Yeah. And then for us, it did progress into actual attempts of taking his life, which was, to this day, probably one of the most difficult years of our life. And we could probably do an entire episode on the things that we've sort of gathered along the way. One of the things for me that was the most helpful, they refer to it as wraparound care in the medical community. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term, but I love the picture of it because in some ways I think in like almost biblically, you can picture this in terms of how God cares for us. But wraparound care is this idea that our kids, when they walk through this, need more than just one person. Like it's more than just one doctor. It's more than just one solution. And so for us, it took time to build that. It's kind of a building process. And not just for him, but there was sort of the wraparound for him and then the wraparound for our family. Like we needed all of that care in terms of like what you're describing and what you're walking through with your child. The thing, again, there's so much more I don't know to the story, but my encouragement would be to consider holistically, what does that wraparound care look like for your child? So for my son, he did need a talk therapist. Like it was important for him to have a safe place to talk that wasn't mom and dad, that he could just say what he needed to say. He actually ended up needing a medication therapist that kind of helped us navigate. That's a really complicated thing that I wouldn't dare try and jump into here, because when you're dealing with kids and as they grow, hormones and there's just a lot that's involved in that when you start talking about medication. And we're not anti-medication.
I think the thing that you're driving at here, like, and I think what's behind what Bethany is saying, like, we think about this very holistically. There is a spiritual component. There's an emotional component. There's a psychological component. These are all made by God, and the spiritual component runs through all things. And so, yes, foundationally, we are very big on prayer. Like, we have an army of people that have prayed our son through high school, and I don't think he would be where he is today without that. But it also doesn't mean that we ignore the fact that God has given, one of the things that God's provision is answer to our prayers. There's a difference between, we're not cynical towards the medical community, but we are a little bit skeptical. And what I mean by that is we don't just take everything at face value. And when it comes to medicine, it's very complex because, to be honest with you, there's really good information and a lot of research on the brain, but a lot of it is they're guessing. They're guessing what your child needs. And so you have to be an advocate for them. And it is a lot of prayer on how to walk through that journey. And when they're in adolescence, and this is an elementary student, but when you add in puberty, like we used to say all the time, like, our son is a sinner, he's going through puberty, and he has mental health issues. And that is a soup that will never be able to completely solve what is what. Like, we don't know what are the things he's just going to outgrow. We don't know what are the things that are just that he could control that he's not controlling. We don't know that for sure. There's some things we can look at and be like, that behavior doesn't line up with the Bible, but there's a lot of things we don't know. And then there's also, like, what is the actual, like, mental health and things that we're like, all of those things are present and real. I would not say just pray more and trust God. I would say pray more, trust God, and work the process. And I say all that. It's easy to stay on the other side when you have a kid who made it through some of the things that our son made it through. There are plenty of people who did things exactly the same or better than we did and didn't have the same outcome. So it is not a math problem to be solved. It is much more a walk of faith. So
Yeah. And kind of like we said in marriage, that in marriage we need community. I think in raising our kids, we need community. We need people, like-minded people in our lives, because I've experienced this, especially with our son. We could say something to our son 1,000,000 times, and then a friend says the same thing, and he's like, oh, like it's...
that's why you send them to camp.
Yeah.
So that somebody else will say the things
sure.
you've been saying all along, and then they'll be like, oh.
The other thing I would just say to that one specifically is one of the things that we did have to work into our family when dealing with things with suicidal ideation is, in order for you to be here, everybody needs to be safe. You need to be safe. We need to be safe. And so as they start to understand those things, like one of the things was we actually can't just be threatening to take our lives. Like that's not a safe conversation. Like, because when you say that, we're going to have to get other help. Because if there are other children in the household, and I'm just saying this from our experience, they're walking through this too. And so those types of things, even at that level, it's important to bring safety into your home as best you can.
A lot more we could say. I want to make sure we get time to other questions, but just one resource I can mention. I encourage you, if you are in leadership in a church or an individual, to find this resource and use it. And I do qualify that it is a secular resource, and it will have things in it that you're going to have to parse through that may not be fully biblically aligned, but there's a lot of good in it. And that is Mental Health First Aid. It is essentially how to do the triage. And it taught us things about what our son was going through, it, like the difference between suicidal ideation and what happens when they have a plan of action and a means, and then how to even determine between those two things. And a lot of them are counterintuitive. Like, you think, oh, I shouldn't bring that topic up because it's going to, like, put the seed in their mind. And it's actually the exact opposite. If you have a child or anyone that you know that's in that space, you actually we would ask directly, like, every single week, are you thinking about this? Do you have a plan? Like, we'd have a series of questions that we'd go through. So nobody's favorite topic. But at the same time, this is a very real thing with the world that we're living in right now. Everybody has somebody in their orbit that is walking through these type of challenges. So I appreciate the question.
Just no easy
ones.
Answers.
I don't know if we have an easier question, but we have a different question. All right. This one kind of taps into communication and expectations in marriage, which is so much of what is determining the health of our marriage. I don't know how to share about my day. Sometimes I feel like my timing is wrong or my spouse doesn't seem interested, so I just avoid it. It can make me feel unseen and unimportant, like I don't do anything of value in a day.
I'm going to let you start on this one.
Yeah, let me start on this
Yeah.
one. Yeah. Well, so I'm going to project something on this question, and then I'm going to make you help me with it. So both spouses, the man and the woman, knowing that what you do each day is of value is important. But I think that especially when you're in seasons when you're the one who may be doing the primary care of the children, if you're a stay-at-home mom, that is a time when it can feel like, did I do anything of value today? And so maybe the first thing to think about beyond how you talk about it with one another is, how did you process in that season? Because you have so many gifts and abilities. But at that time, the greatest call in your life was to be with our kids. That was true when they were very little. It was also true when they were in high school. How did you process that value proposition?
One of the things that I hear in that is like that there has been actual experience of, I shared something, I feel like you shot me down. And so is there a hurt that needs to be talked through? The other one that I struggle with, I'll just say this from my end, when I've had a hard time opening up to you, has often been when I've played out the conversation in my head and decided what you're going to say, which actually really isn't super fair to you because you never got the chance to respond to my sharing with you. But I think sometimes what I've learned is I need to be courageous enough and vulnerable and authentic enough to put things on the table for you, even when I'm scared, like I'm nervous about how you're going to respond, to give you the opportunity to respond. And then if it does, there's been times when we've hurt one another in the way we've responded to opening up, and then being willing to say, hey, this is how that made me feel. Like, I don't know that it was your intention, but I feel unseen, or I feel like what I'm doing isn't important.
Yeah, I think it's really good. I think that another thing that I think about here is that sometimes when we have these sort of rifts in our marriage, like you said, practicing the conversation in advance in our mind, we think like, okay, I need to have the conversation that's going to solve this. And we put so much pressure on one conversation that I just have to have the right words. I need to bring it up the right way versus opening up a conversation. And what I mean by that is going to your spouse and being like, look, I just need you to think about this and process this. And then in the next week, we need to find a time to have a conversation about this. The story that I'm telling myself is that you don't see or care about the work that I'm doing every single day. Maybe I don't know how to talk about it the right way. You could, like, I'm open to feedback and learning how to do this. But what I'm not comfortable with is staying in this place where we're not able to, we have to figure out over time how to have this conversation. And by opening and then giving the other person permission to walk away from that, process it. Because that's another thing that's when mismatched expectations, oftentimes, like we face this, like one of you processes verbally at 150 miles an hour, and the other person needs to go away and go hike a mountain and go spend some time away with Jesus and then come back. And some of you are nodding your head, like the elbow, which one is which. So the couple things that I said there. So one is opening up the conversation. Now that's an open conversation. You kind of put the cards on the table. And I do think time bound to say, like, within this next week, we need to have this conversation. The other thing that we picked this up from Brene Brown, who's a secular writer. Again, some wheat and some chaff, some good and bad. But she talked about how in conflict you use the phrase, and this has been gold, is to say, the story I'm telling myself is ... It's a really powerful tool to put on the table before your spouse, the very real thing that you are experiencing without defining it as being 100% everything from every angle and all the facts. And so, hey, the story I'm telling myself is that the reason that you didn't do this is because you don't care about what I do every day. And it allows them to like kind of play with the idea without necessarily attacking. It's not like this is a silver bullet, but it's a really helpful tool in conversation. Anything you want to add on that?
No, it almost sounds cheesy, but it has been really helpful for us. I can think of like in recent days, because we both work full time, but he works mostly from home, whereas I work out of the home. And there was a period of time where work for me was getting crazy. We became like kind of the ships passing kind of thing, like we're here, we're there, small connection time. And there was a moment where you sat down and you're like, hey, so basically the story I'm telling myself is I'm feeling unappreciated. Like I feel like I am doing everything in the house, and like I'm basically, I forget, you had a funny term for it too, like running Needham Enterprise. It was like that I'm just running Needham Enterprise over here. And it was even helpful for me on the other side of that, because it for sure was not my intention. But then even as he said it, I could sort of see from his perspective, man, yeah, because I'm just sort of flying in and flying out here. And so it gave us the opportunity to sit and be like, okay, how can we, like, what can I do to be helpful? Because I don't want you to feel that way. It allowed me to say, truthfully, I'm feeling underwater right now at my job. I feel like I am so far behind, and I feel like I'm trying, and it's obviously not communicating. So what can we do? And so for us, it was sort of opening again that conversation of like, let's work on this together. Because I think where the most conflict has come from us is when we go into these, and I'm just out for me. Like I need to be heard. This is about my needs. And he goes in with the same, and it's more like a tug of war versus coming to the table and being able to be like, this is an us thing. How can we work together to make this something that we're both, like both of us are feeling loved, but also thinking about the other person and showing up for each other.
I don't think that what we just described is going to, in an instant, solve this question about mismatched expectations. We do have an episode 22 of our podcast is all about mismatched expectations, which is a good one to go in and check out. So yeah, keep working at it. Marriage without communication is really just coexisting and running a house. So this is what you're going to be working on. I think we got time for maybe 2 more questions here. Let's see.
No pressure.
No pressure. I thought this was an interesting question. I don't think we've talked about this before on the podcast, but I think we've all experienced something like this. If you have close friends, another couple, who you observe drifting into patterns that feel healthy for their marriage, maybe they're isolating, not attending church, maybe they're helicopter parents, how do you step in with love without overstepping the line?
Ooh, good one. So don't be a Karen. Is that what it's saying? Just kidding. This is good.
I could start.
I feel like you got some good wisdom on this one.
So being self-reflective is so important. It's so true, like with your spouse, but even with your other relationships. And especially when you see things that like don't align, the first thing you have to do is kind of step back and just be really prayerful and mindful that there are things that you might think are unhelpful. There are things that you might think are unhealthy. And there are things that are just blatantly unholy. And you're discerning between what those things are, especially knowing that you have limited information. You need to have a posture of humility, being led by the Spirit. Nothing will elicit more opinions than how you parent your kids. Amen? Like seeing how other people parent their kids, how you parent your kids. And a lot of those things are matters of conviction. They are. What I mean by that is there are things in the Bible that are absolute doctrines that if we don't believe these things, then we're not Christians. Who Jesus is, what we think about the Bible. And then there's matters of conviction, which is how we try to live our lives in alignment with what Scripture says. How you school your kids is like a classic example that we always talk about. Is like the principle of Scripture is that it is our responsibility as parents to shepherd the souls of our children. The application of that is, a lot of people will get really belligerent. Like, if you love Jesus and you love your kids, then you must X school, you homeschool, or you must private Christian school, or you must send them into the public school, or they will have no more witness. And our conviction has always been like, no, like it is our responsibility before God to, with each of our kids each year, to think about what is the best way to parent our child. So I think being very careful, like where we get ourselves in a lot of trouble is when we judge other Christians around their convictions. Now, at the same time, you have to have a certain measure of alignment in your convictions in order to be in relationship with other people and to do life with them. But I will say this, if your convictions are mismatched, that may be a reason to distance yourself in a relationship, but it's not a reason to have an intervention, like to judge them on that. Do you track what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. So that would be number one. But let's use the example that a couple is disengaging from spiritual community. They're no longer attending church. They're isolating themselves, which I think we could all agree is a bad, unhealthy pattern that could become a very unholy pattern if preserving for a long time. What counsel would you give to that situation?
I always lean first into because you're describing this as these are close friends, like these are people you're in community, is to check in on them and see what's going on and if they're okay, rather than coming in with the, hey, you're not doing this and it's wrong, is what's really going on.
You say I'll agree.
Yeah.
You do that.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we're just not going to church.
Yeah. Then I feel like at that point you can be like, all right, I feel like I love you. We're sisters, brothers, whatever. And I love you too much to let you just keep wandering without having a hard conversation.
How would you open that conversation though?
I love you. Let's have a hard conversation. I'm usually a pretty straight shooter. I've walked through this with different friends. It's not the church experience, but recently one of my friends that I'm in very close relationship, but it's one of the married couples in our kind of crew. And one of the things that I observed as her friend is that she was starting to say a lot of yeses to people outside of her spouse and family. And over time, as that was happening, she was also starting to become very frustrated with her husband and children. And it started to sort of tip very clearly, like, kind of, I'm exhausted serving all these other people, and so my family's just driving me crazy, was sort of the theme that it took. And so again, I'm in relationship. I love this woman with all my heart. She's one of my best friends. And I also know that she loves Jesus. I know her well enough to know, I don't even think it was an intentional, but it definitely was drifting into that. And so I'm like, girl, I love you. I feel like we need to have a hard conversation is what I said. And she's like, what's going on? And I just said, listen, I've been paying attention to recently. You've started saying a lot of yeses to people where it's taking a lot from you. And I feel like part of what you're communicating with me in frustration with your spouse might be connected to the fact that you're so tired from serving all of these other people. And I think you need to start saying no to some people. I think you need to start protecting that and realize that some of these things that you're really angry at him about aren't actually really him. Again, he's not perfect, but it's that you just don't have bandwidth right now because you've put it all into these other commitments. And I didn't hear from her for a couple of days, and that's fine. Because honestly, part of you having those hard conversations is, and I've said this to friends, like, I need to have the courage to do that. And I need to be responsible for if I feel like God has literally put me in a place to say something, but I can't be responsible for their response to that. Part of how I love her is she needs to be able to feel and process that in whatever way she needs to do that. And she did, and she came back and actually in that scenario was incredibly gracious and thank you so much. And I just appreciate the fact that you were willing to say it. And she even said, she's like, I think I've known it, but I just haven't really stopped to address it. And so
that's the positive outcome. I think if things are so misaligned, like one of the analogies that Bethany's used many times is this question of like, who's in your boat? Mm-hmm. Like, think of like your closest relationship of couples as like a boat. And on some level, you all have to be rowing in the same direction. You can love people, but if you have them in your boat and they're just rowing against you all the time and rowing the opposite direction, that's not healthy. And so there is even biblical mandates for like distancing from those relationships. Maybe it's a disengagement, maybe it's a distancing. Don't just ghost people, like have conversations with them, but you really do need to be guarded with that. And sometimes that pruning is for a season, and other times, so you're going to have different relationships, and that's not easy. I don't say that lightly. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that, again, that was kind of a good outcome.
Yeah.
I have for sure experienced the distance and loss of friendship.
I blocked your number,
But again, I would say in those instances, that is a healthy distance for if they're going to take that path and they're absolutely like, this is what I'm doing, then in some ways, like, you then do need to protect your own marriage and your own family. Mm-hmm. And, I've had friends that for 2 or 3 years, there was distance. And then after 2 or 3 years, there was a redemption. So sometimes it happens for a season and God redeems. I think God's in the business of redemption and not always on our timeline.
That's well said. All right, let's do one last question here. We had many great questions that we didn't get to because you guys had asked really hard questions. All right, so this one's about technology, which every single household deals with today. If you started over today, how would you treat technology in marriage and child raising? What are your positives and your negatives? This is a big one. I saw this post online, which is kind of funny that it was online, but it said that when I grew up a child in the 80s here. So when I grew up in the 80s, and especially the 90s, as the internet was being invented, we went to the internet to escape the real world. And now we go to the real world to escape the internet. That is how that has all flipped. And a lot of us understand that. So yeah, this is one that I think regrets might be the right word, but there are definitely things that I would do differently.
Yes.
With our kids.
1,000%. And I say that knowing it would have been really hard to do the things that I think I would have done differently. Our kids are older now, and things are even different now than they were when they were younger. But the first thing, I have said this to my kids, if I had it to do over again, I would not have succumbed to the pressure for them to get a cell phone, a smartphone in their hands in middle school. I don't know what I was thinking. And I know that it's even harder now to say no to that because they will tell you every kid has a cell phone. Like it's like this is a thing. But the more research that I have done and watched our kids go through, their brains and development are already so tender and vulnerable, and like the access that it's like putting a computer in their pocket and expecting them to be able to manage all that comes with that feels really unfair to that generation. And I know for them, it feels like part of being cool and everything else. I would go back and be the hated parent and be like, I am sorry. I'm looking at this from what's best for you. And you being the popular kid in your class is actually not the healthiest thing. Like, we're not doing the smartphone. And I mean,
we used all the lockdowns and all the things and all the.
Well, and we did have a rule in our house. It's about as far as we went. We said that smart choices got smartphones and dumb choices got dumb phones. And so our son actually had a flip dumb phone for after like a second of having a smartphone because he lost privileges to that pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think the tide is really turning on this. I think the good news as a parent today is that I think that there are more people that are tuning into this conversation. Obviously, Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxious Generation, really kind of brought and cauterized a lot of, if you haven't checked that book out or listened to him on a podcast, he kind of just synthesized so much research over the last decade and a half and how this has happened. I mean, candidly, like essentially what he says is like, smartphones are going to be this generation's cigarettes. Like, why do we give them to children? And it's interesting because our daughter is now starting to student teach. And it was the first year that the schools were adopting the no phone policy. And it was really fascinating to watch our daughter, who grew up in the generation that could have cell phones. The only thing that was a gift for us is we live so far in the woods in New Hampshire that her school didn't have a cell phone service.
Yeah,
there you go. Move to rural New Hampshire and find a school without a cell phone. But she's like, I like this, but I think this is going to be really hard. It was really fascinating to see that.
It was eye-opening for her to see the emotional response that kids had to having their phones taken just for the time that they were in a classroom. And it was actually interesting for her as a 20-year-old. It almost like made her self-reflective on like, oh, this is probably a problem. Like that they can't like be away from this thing for any time. And we've done times with our kids now where we're going to put our phones away. We would do the family stack where at dinner table, everybody stacks their phones and you put them off and we're like, we're here, we're present together. So from phones to screens, I would say if I had it to do over again, when it comes to screens, I would just decrease screen time and increase face-to-face time, because everything from their development to your connection with them and the ability to like, I know that as a parent, when they were younger, there were times where we were just so tired. We're like, put on a movie, hand them an iPad, like I'm wiped. And I definitely am sitting in this place now of like, wow, those years where they would just sit and be with you do actually fly by. And there is a day, and I don't have like, it's not a terrible, like I cry over it, but I think, man, I don't actually get that with my kid. The one thing about an empty nester is I have grown kids with school and work and everything else, that there's a part of you that's like, wow, that there's something precious about that season where you can spend time with your kids and you don't need a screen. Like you can just be with them. If I could look back at myself back then, I'd be like, turn off the screen. I know you're tired, but this is going to fly by so quickly.
Well, I'll put a plug in for camp because we're at a camp, but our kids, like going to camp in the summer, having cell phone free time like that was a really big deal for them. And the last thing I would just add is we talked a lot about our kids, but we need to be, again, self-reflective on this. Like, how are we doing with our screen time and our attachment to these things? And I know that's like a matter of conviction for me. You know, I always use the excuse, well, I'm a networker and I connect to all these pastors. And it's like, no, I think you're just doom scrolling. Like, I think you're like spiritualizing your doom scrolling. Even this year, like I've actually put like screen time limits on my phone. It's one of the new things I'm experimenting with, where I only get a certain amount of time on social media. And after 8 o'clock, like most of my apps go dead, except for podcasts, because I still like to listen to podcasts at night. But
was that a plug for podcasts? The podcast? Nice. I was like, wow, advertising.
Yeah, that's good. So
yeah. And I would say for me, the one thing that I've had to challenge myself with my phone, and I want to say it was my boss at work that we were talking about this, and this idea of feeling the need to be accessible all the time, like that's sort of what this cell phone, like, oh, well, what if I can't reach them, or what if they can't reach me? And I was being asked that actually recently on our vacation. I was telling somebody about how we put our phones and we lock them up, and they're like, how do you do that with your kids? Like, they wouldn't be able to reach you. And I was like, well, they don't have like access to just text and I'm there. I said, but if there's like an emergency, there's a number that they can call. And it really had me thinking. We were processing through, and I was like, I think part of being willing to shut down our phones sometimes is actually really good for us to remember that, as Andy likes to tell me, the world already has a savior and it's not us. And sometimes the best thing that we can do for the people around us is to take ourselves out of this hero spot that we, like, our egos love to sit in, and be like, we actually aren't the ones that you need to be able to call 24/7, that sometimes not being available is actually also good for us to kind of put ourselves and remember that God's throne is not a love seat. It's not you and him up there ruling. It's a one-seater and he's got it. And so it's okay for you to shut down and disconnect sometimes, to be connected with him and not accessible to everyone.
great answer.
Oh, thanks.
Great. All right, we're going to wrap this thing up here. And I said that was my last question, but I have one more question for you.
Oh.
And because we passing referenced this morning, and I felt like we needed to go deeper onto this. What is your favorite documentary about otters?
Oh my goodness.
You don't even know the name of it, do you?
I don't know the name of it, but do you know the name of it?
Yeah, I looked it up.
Oh, okay. Well,
yes, it's called Bill and Molly, by the way.
Bill and Molly. Write it down, guys.
It's produced by National Geographic. If you have Disney Plus, you can watch it.
I love that we just told them to shut off their screens, and now we're giving a television recommendation.
Well, I'm not saying zero screens, but we haven't finished the documentary, so we don't know if it is a sad ending or a happy ending. So we do put that qualifier on that.
I actually joked with him today because we had talked to you guys about it, and then after, I was like, you know, I just realized.
Does Molly die?
I was like, we've had kind of like, and we were
a lot of loss in our lives.
We've had the last month has been abnormal, and it's just been like, I don't know if you've had those seasons where it's a weird relentless. It's like hits keep coming. And so I joked with him because we are part of how I work through pain is with humor. It's just part of how I'm wired. But I was like, wait a second. I was like, we're watching this documentary. I was like, you have to Google if that thing dies. And I was like, because I feel like our track record right now is I'm going to get all attached to this otter, and then we're going to be watching it, and then the whole story is that the otter dies. I was like, and that's going to be my breaking point. I'm going to fall apart because Molly the otter.
Tune into next week's episode to find out if Molly dies.
If she does, I'm not finishing it.
Okay. Well, thank you guys for being here today in person, our friends here. Very natural applause. And thanks to everybody tuning in. We appreciate it. And we'll Bethany's dying over here. You're so embarrassed by me.
It's fine. It's fine.
Good job.
I just loved your.
That isn't going to translate. It's an audio podcast. Great job.
Thank you. You too. Great job, studio audience.
Yes. And what do we say? Bye.
Bye.